What if loving a man cost you everything, but saved the world? Seth Harlan stared at the email on his laptop screen, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat he could no longer control. The subject line read, "Urgent Board Meeting, Professional Conduct Review." He had known this moment would come, but knowing and feeling it were two different universes. At 38, he was the youngest full professor in the neuroscience department at Pacific University in Los Angeles, the man whose team had just cracked a protein pathway that could slow Alzheimer's by 40%. Yesterday, the world had celebrated him in quiet academic circles. Today, the world wanted him gone. The leak had started with a single photograph. Seth and Austin Reed laughing on the balcony of their Silver Lake apartment. Austin's hand resting on the small of Seth's back the way it always did when they thought no one was watching. A jealous colleague had forwarded it to the university president with a note about moral values and donor complaints. Within hours, the conservative alumni network had ignited. Protests formed on the quad. Headlines screamed, "Respected professor's hidden life exposed." Seth's phone vibrated nonstop. Colleagues offering cautious sympathy, reporters demanding statements, his mother in Texas leaving voicemails that ended in tears. He closed the laptop and walked to the window. Below, students held signs, "Truth over talent," and "Keep science clean." The irony burned. His research had been clean, rigorous, peer-reviewed across 3 continents. Yet the only thing the public now saw was the man he loved. Austin appeared in the doorway, still in his paint-splattered photographer's apron, dark hair tousled from the wind. "They suspended you?" he asked quietly. Seth nodded, unable to speak. Austin crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled him into an embrace that smelled of coffee and safety. "We'll fight this," Austin whispered. "You've spent your whole life proving you're brilliant. Now prove you're human." But Seth wasn't sure he could. At 19, he had promised himself he would never let his sexuality derail his career. He had dated women in college for cover, buried himself in labs, and only allowed Austin into his heart after tenure was secure. 5 years of stolen weekends, whispered, "I love yous" at red lights, and careful omissions at faculty dinners. Now the careful architecture of his double life lay in ruins. That night they sat on the couch with takeout Thai food growing cold. Austin scrolled through the online comments while Seth stared at the ceiling. "They're calling you a predator, Seth. They don't even know you." Seth's throat tightened. "My mother said if I don't resign, she'll never speak to me again. My father hasn't called. He probably won't." Austin set the phone down. "Then we build a new family. You and me. That's always been enough." But Seth wasn't sure anything would ever feel like enough again. The next morning, the university's official statement appeared. Professor Harlan had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. His lab was locked. His students were reassigned. And somewhere in Stockholm, the Nobel Committee was finalizing its shortlist, his name still on it. The drive from Los Angeles to Austin's childhood home in the San Fernando Valley felt like crossing a border into another life. Austin's parents had always known their son was gay. They had marched in pride parades before he could walk. They greeted Seth with open arms and quiet fury at the university. "Stay as long as you need," Austin's mother said, pressing a key into his palm. Seth spent the days pacing the backyard, replaying every choice that had led him here. He remembered the first time he saw Austin, freshman orientation at UCLA, Austin behind a camera capturing the chaos. Seth had been the serious TA in a pressed shirt, Austin the laughing artist who asked, "Do you ever smile, Professor?" 6 months later, they kissed in the darkroom, developer chemicals sharp in the air, and Seth had known he was ruined for anyone else. Now, in the guest room, Austin found him staring at old research notes. "You're not sleeping," Austin said. "I keep thinking if I had just stayed in the closet, none of this would have happened." Austin sat on the bed's edge. "And you would have been miserable. I watched you fake it for years, Seth. Every holiday dinner when you introduced me as my roommate. Every time you flinched when someone asked if you were seeing anyone. That wasn't living." Seth's voice cracked. "But my work, my students, they needed me. The protein model we built could help millions. Now it's tainted because of me." Austin took his hands. "No, it's tainted because of people who value hate over healing. Your research doesn't have a sexuality. You do. And I love every part of it." The conversation ended in tears and the kind of desperate kiss that only comes when the world is trying to pull you apart. Later, while Austin slept, Seth opened his laptop and drafted a resignation letter. He stared at it for 20 minutes before deleting every word. Back in Los Angeles, the protests had grown. A prominent donor threatened to withdraw $10 million unless the university addressed the issue. Seth's department chair, Dr. Elena Vargas, once a mentor, called him at midnight. "I'm fighting for you, but the board is scared. They want a statement distancing yourself from personal matters." Seth laughed bitterly. "Distancing myself from the man I love? That's not a statement. That's surrender." He hung up and walked to the balcony where the original photo had been taken. Austin joined him, wrapping a blanket around them both. "Whatever you decide, I'm here. But promise me one thing. Don't become the version of yourself you hated at 19. Seth nodded, but inside he felt the old fear rising like floodwater. The call from Stockholm came on a Tuesday. Dr. Lars Eriksson from the Nobel Committee spoke in careful English. "Professor Harlan, your work on amyloid beta modulation has been selected for the 2026 prize in physiology or medicine. The announcement is in 3 weeks. We hope you will attend." Seth sat on the kitchen floor after the call ended, phone still in his hand. Austin found him there, slid down beside him, and waited. "I can't go," Seth finally said. "Not like this. The press will turn the ceremony into a circus about my sexuality instead of the science." Austin's voice was steady. "Or you can go and show the world that brilliant minds come in every orientation. That the man who might cure Alzheimer's also loves another man without shame." Seth looked at him, really looked. Austin's eyes held no doubt, only the same steady faith that had carried them through 5 years of secrecy. "You're asking me to risk everything again. I'm asking you to stop risking your soul." That night, Seth called his mother in Texas. The conversation lasted 11 minutes and ended with her saying, "I raised you to be a good man, not to parade this lifestyle." The silence afterward felt louder than any protest chant. He flew to Austin anyway. His father met him at the gate of the family ranch, arms crossed, Stetson low. "Son, I've read the papers. People are saying things about you I can't repeat." Seth stood straighter. "They're saying I'm gay, Dad." "Which I am. And I'm still the same person who fixed the tractor at 16 and graduated summa cum laude." His father's jaw worked. "Your mother's not ready." "I'm not sure I am either." "Then I'll wait." "But I'm not hiding anymore." The visit ended without hugs, but without slammed doors either. Small mercies. Back in California, Austin had transformed their apartment into a makeshift command center. Legal briefs from the ACLU covered the coffee table. A new photograph hung on the wall, the two of them at sunrise, Austin's head on Seth's shoulder, no hiding. "I hired a PR firm," Austin admitted. "They say if you speak before the announcement, you control the narrative." Seth stared at the photo. For the first time, the fear felt smaller than the love. The op-ed appeared in the New York Times on a Friday, "Why I Will Not Resign." Seth wrote every word himself. He described the research, the late nights, the students who called him the professor who never gives up. Then he wrote about Austin, how love had sharpened his focus, how the same heart that beat for science also beat for one man. He ended with a question. "If my personal truth disqualifies me from saving lives, what does that say about the value we place on those lives?" The piece went viral. Supporters flooded the university inbox. Celebrities tweeted solidarity. The protests on campus shrank as counter-protesters arrived with rainbow flags. Dr. Vargas called it dawn. "The board is meeting again. Your funding is restored. But they want you to keep the personal quiet." Seth laughed. "Quiet is what got me here." The day before the Nobel announcement, he and Austin drove to the beach at Malibu. They walked barefoot, waves cold against their ankles. Austin stopped, turned to him. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I'm proud of you. Not the professor. The man who finally chose himself." Seth pulled him close right there on the sand, no longer caring who saw. Photographers caught the moment. By evening, it was everywhere. For once, the headline read, "Professor Harlan Embraces Love Instead of Scandal." That night, Seth dreamed of his childhood bedroom in Texas, the posters of astronauts and scientists he had taped above his bed. In the dream, his father stood in the doorway and said, "I was wrong." Seth woke with tears on his pillow and Austin's arm across his chest. The official announcement came at 2:17 a.m. Pacific time. The Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine is awarded to Professor Seth Harlan for his revolutionary work on Alzheimer's disease. Austin kissed him so hard they both laughed and cried at the same time. Stockholm in December glittered under snow. The Grand Hotel ballroom glowed with chandeliers and diplomats. Seth stood in a tailored black tuxedo, Austin beside him in midnight blue, both men wearing subtle rainbow pins no larger than a dime. Reporters lined the red carpet. One asked, "Professor, how does it feel to be the first openly gay Nobel laureate in this category?" Seth smiled for the cameras. "It feels like finally breathing after holding my breath for 20 years. Inside, the ceremony unfolded with classical music and solemn speeches. When Seth rose to accept the medal, the room fell into a hush that felt electric. He looked out at the sea of faces, scientists, royalty, journalists, and saw his parents in the third row. His mother's eyes were wet. His father's hand rested on hers. They had come. He began simply. "This medal belongs to every researcher who stayed late, every patient who hoped, and every person who loved someone enough to keep fighting, including the man who stood beside me when the world told me to choose between my heart and my mind." He gestured toward Austin, who stood tall under the lights. "Love is not a distraction. It is the reason we search for cures, because we cannot bear to lose the people we cherish." Applause rolled like thunder. Later, at the banquet, his father approached. "Son, I watched you up there and realized I almost lost you over fear." "I'm sorry." Seth hugged him for the first time in years. His mother joined them, whispering, "I'm proud of the man you've become." Austin watched from across the room, smiling softly. When they finally returned to their suite overlooking the frozen harbor, Austin pulled Seth onto the balcony. Snowflakes caught in their hair. "You did it," he said. "We did it," Seth corrected. "I couldn't have stood on that stage without you." They kissed under the northern lights, the city lights of Stockholm reflecting in the water like scattered stars. The flight home felt different. Seth no longer scanned the cabin for familiar faces or worried about overheard conversations. Austin slept against his shoulder, metal tucked safely in the carry-on. Seth opened his laptop and began drafting a new grant proposal, not for more research, but for a foundation that would fund young queer scientists who felt the same pressure he once had. Back in Los Angeles, the university held a reception. Students who had once protested now lined up for selfies. Dr. Vargas handed him the keys to his old lab. The board voted unanimously. "Your position is secure, permanently." That evening, Seth and Austin hosted a small dinner on their balcony. Old friends, new allies, even a few reconciled family members filled the space with laughter. Someone asked Seth what he had learned. He looked at Austin across the table and answered without hesitation. That the bravest thing any of us can do is refuse to shrink ourselves to fit someone else's comfort. Months later, the foundation launched with its first cohort of scholars. Seth watched Austin photograph the inaugural class. Young men and women who carried the same dreams and the same fears he once had. He felt the weight of the medal in his pocket and knew the journey had been worth every scar. The man who had once hidden now stood in full sunlight, and the world was brighter for it. In telling Seth and Austin's story, I realized that identity is not a weakness to overcome, but a strength to stand upon. The greatest lesson here is simple. Authenticity may cost you temporary approval, but it earns you a life that no one can take away. My gentle advice: if you're holding a truth that scares you, let it out. The people worth keeping will stay. The rest were never your audience to begin with. Choose yourself. The world will adjust.